The protagonist of this story finally confesses his feelings to the villainess, only to be literally whipped into a bloody mess and mocked by everyone. She does not hesitate to curse his incompetence, flaunting the vast differences in their status. Some are born noble, while others, like him, are destined to remain lowly. But then, she crosses a line, one that shatters his restraint. That was the breaking point. Something inside him snaps. 10 years later, at the villainess's estate. Inside, a maid and the butler were fooling around. The butler wanted to clap them cheeks despite her refusal and warnings about their mistress. Now, he proceeded with foreplay, and she pleaded for him to take it easy. After all, they couldn't just do this in the hallway. But the guy was too excited to listen, even noting that she seemed like the mistress, while she called him a pervert. That's the reason he got so turned on. He wished for a day when her arrogant attitude would backfire. Speaking of which, the villainess appeared, slamming the door with a loud thud. Both of them froze at the sight of the villainess. The narrator then formally introduced her as Evelyn Winter, the head of the Winter family estate. With that out of the way, the story switches to outside the estate. Both the maid and the butler desperately pleaded for mercy, promising never to do it again. Normally, something like this would get someone dismissed or fired, but Evelyn just scoffed at the idea. Inside a box, a gun was revealed. With a cold, chilling aura, she presented two options: either die at her hands, or freeze slowly to death. Both were frightened beyond their wits. The butler reminded her about her title, saying that doing this would definitely leave a stain on her reputation. However, she didn't react, and her personal butler also understood the assignment. With that, he slowly approached the fool who begged for his help. But he just silenced him with a sharp kick to the chest. That sent him tumbling down the stairs. The next moment, Evelyn spoke. She was grateful that the butler worried about her reputation, so if he wanted to maintain it, he should happily die. They shouldn't worry, she intended to bury them in a gold casket together. Hearing this, they swore a time would come when her reputation couldn't help her. With that said, she ended the conversation, sending them together to another life. After a moment of silence, she handed the gun to her personal butler Joseph. She didn't like the gun. The accuracy was off, so he agreed to pay special attention and inform the workers. While leaving, Joseph voiced his concern, noting it was winter, so delivery might be slow, which caused her to reprimand him for thinking like a child. She suggested he tip the workers to get the work done faster. She hadn't gone far before something caught her attention. A maid tried to stop the little girl from hearing noises outside. She immediately apologized to Evelyn, explaining it was the recent noise that startled her daughter. So Evelyn apologized and made an excuse that the sounds meant to scared wolves. She headed inside with her daughter, asking about her well-being and what she was holding. She showed her a drawing of a flower, which was impossible to be from their region, concluding she might have copied it from books, and the daughter nodded in affirmation. Evelyn is momentarily taken aback. She recalls the very first moment someone had offered her a flower. He went on to explain the great deal and effort he took to make it. And if she didn't like it, she could just toss it into the trash. It turned out to be our protagonist. Now, he was shocked as she complimented the flower. It was a bit bad that the flower had no scent since it was crafted. This caused him to hesitate as his mind raced. Regardless, he lowered his head and promised to get her a real flower someday. At the end, she remembered the brutal scene and what she did to him. Back to the present, she suggested her daughter Sherry should make it blue next time. However, midway through their conversation, suddenly another servant burst through the door, panting and exclaiming that they were in trouble. Calmly, she asked about it, and the servant reported that their goods that were meant to sail to the northern region were all seized. We see literal shock on her face as the man continued. The people involved were the military, and they were obligated to root out ruthless nobles like her, making her furiously demand an explanation. Speaking of the devil, the man in charge just arrived at the Winter estate. While approaching, the servant noted his name was Jyleth Black. He was once a soldier but recently was titled the hero of the country after his crushing victories on the battlefield. Based on the situation, It seems Evelyn's goods were seen as supplies to arm the enemy, and her goods were weapons. Sorry if I forgot to mention that. Regardless, he warned them to be careful because the colonel was no different from the devil. Later, we see Colonel Gileth Black standing in front of the manor. Letting out a pop from his crack, he ordered his men not to drag her out. He would be heading inside to greet her out of courtesy. However, his men stormed into the mansion, pointing their rifles at Evelyn and her workers since she was a suspect of supporting the enemy. Meanwhile, the colonel apologized for the rudeness of his men. He humbly called himself a low-born soldier, basically, a commoner. At the same time, Evelyn was utterly bewildered seeing him. As he continued speaking, memories of the past flooded her mind. Gileth, feeling humiliated and bleeding, struggled to speak at first. But she just looked down at him with clear disgust. With gritted teeth, he vowed to make her regret it for the rest of her life. We can all imagine she gave our boy a purpose, literally carving the path for him to become the devil. Now she was shaken, asking what right he had to badge in. Well, he didn't respond to this. Now, all dignified and composed, he apologized for the wrongful addressing her. After all, she was now the head of the family. Later, an inspection was carried out under royal decree. The House of Winter is suspected of colluding with the nation's enemy by smuggling military supplies. So, everyone part of the family must cooperate with the investigation in order to uncover the truth. Disobedience will be treated as treason. Normally, the servants are worried since they don't know anything and have no role in family affairs. Evelyn instantly orders silence with her cane. She calls them out for making a fuss. As workers of her house, she wants them to act accordingly. She leaves while ordering the maid to fetch her tea. She senses someone watching. It's our boy, casually waiting for her upstairs. However, before the story proceeds, we get a brief about the monarchy of Altaric. Looking at a map, it's noticeable that the country is surrounded by powerful neighbors. Although they have survived countless threats thanks to their royal army, the suffering of the people began to worsen because of these threats and warfare. The Industrial Revolution also affected social classes, resulting in growing complaints against the royal and noble families. Against this backdrop, that's when our protagonist shows up on the scene. People call him different names like the man from an unknown origin, the Black Beast, the Hound of the Battlefield. To him, none of these names or what people think of him matters. He constantly grabs victory and turned from a commoner to a war hero. Now, he is seen as the hope of the people and Altaric's future. Anyway, back to the story. Gileath asks Evelyn about her husband, Lowen Winter. At first, she feigns ignorance. So, he repeats his question, specifically about Lowen's whereabouts. Evelyn replies sharply, calling him illiterate, and wondering aloud how he became a war hero. His subordinate doesn't like this, but he remains unfazed and continues. He understands Lowen Winter is dead on paper, but he couldn't find his body. Evelyn is shocked and asks if he violated her husband's grave. He calmly affirms, admitting it was wrong, but given the circumstances, his death was too suspicious. They got married 10 years ago, and he died in a train accident 3 years later. However, something didn't add up. Strangely, there were no witnesses to the accident, nor was his body found. What's interesting is that her assets only grew and didn't match what had been reported for the past 7 years after his death. Considering all these factors, he asks directly if her husband is committing treason under the disguise of death. At first, she is awestruck by his detailed analysis, before bursting out laughing like she heard the joke of the century. She thinks he should have become a writer rather than a soldier. Still, Black is cool as ever. He asks why she hasn't remarried in the past 7 years. In response, she says she loved her husband. Well, he didn't expect this response, so she repeats her previous statement. Our protagonist finds it intriguing. He can't imagine how a villainess could be in love. Now he believes she should be the writer. In response to this, she spills tea on him, noting she didn't find his joke funny. His subordinate instantly becomes alarmed. But Evelyn continues. She doesn't feel the least bit intimidated if he marched in with his soldiers just to blackmail her. Also, she advises him not to insult her husband, suggesting he bring proper evidence. With that said, she excuses herself, not forgetting to tell them to get out of her mansion. Later, while heading upstairs, she is surprised to spot her daughter. The little one begins trembling like she sees a ghost. More so, it's our protagonist with a bone-chilling aura. Suddenly, he calls for Evelyn's attention. Apparently, he almost forgot to mention a crucial piece of information before. However, she isn't interested, but he reassures her it's worth it. He doesn't understand yet, but the weapons being transported to their enemy had her house's seal. Now he drops the bomb. Basically, he is only doing her a favor by investigating her husband, and if she fails to prove her innocence, she could be sentenced to death. Hearing this, she struggles to maintain her composure. Now, she places her cane on his chest. She suggests he cries and begs like before. Who knows, she might actually consider it just for old time's sake. It's really bad that her arrogance makes her not understand the gravity of the situation. In a swift motion, he pulls her cane forward, also catching her in the process. He reminds her that she has a child now. With that, he gives his last words, advising her to be careful. Before departing, he announces his departure, hoping to see her the next day. Our boy manages to riz her at this point. Not a bad move though. Next, we learn about the House of Winter, a founding contributor to the Altaric nation and one of the most loyal subjects to the royal family. For this merit, the family was given the northern part of the kingdom, resulting in enormous wealth from mining and the weapons industry. However, the Winters were blinded by wealth, using any means, even underhanded tricks, to expand their business. In other words, their reputation was terrible. So, in order to repair their reputation and restore honor, the previous head arranged a marriage with Loan, the top graduate of the Imperial Academy. In the end, Loan died, leaving the family affairs to Evelyn. Well, instead of feeling grief over losing her husband, she continued ruling the family business using the previous methods. Owning her different title as the heartless widow and cold villainess, she didn't care much about how others saw her. But nothing in life lasts forever, and the family business began declining. Without a legitimate family heir, the Winter family faced significant damage. Let's shift to the next day. The atmosphere is tense because of Gileath Black's proposal. He offers her a paper, insisting she sell her domain to him, in other words, transfer her title to him. He reasons that it would be better for her to willingly retire her duties and live well, rather than forfeiting it to the royal family. In response, she boldly declines the offer, saying she isn't penniless. He replies sharply, pointing out her poor reputation, not to mention her mining profits have declined. As long as they are seen as treasonous smugglers, she'll find it extremely difficult to make future profits. He slides the ownership document toward her. Basically, he is doing all this for her best interest. Looking at the document, she reflects and realizes he has someone backing him. He doesn't deny it, and he's not someone she can confront. This dramatic scene makes her ask if he really cares for her. However, Gileath just tells her to sign the damn thing already. In response, she declines, insisting only the king can grant her such mercy, and since he is not above the king, he should not overstep his authority. While leaving, she orders her servant to prepare her bag. She intends to have a private meeting with His Majesty. They will be leaving the following day. Nighttime approaches quickly. Evelyn stands awake, her mind lingering on Gileath Black's words. Her daughter is also present, while she continuously mumbles. The little one approaches slowly, unaware of her mom's situation. Frustrated, Evelyn demands to know who is disturbing her. She panics when she realizes it's her daughter. Understanding her mistake, she quickly apologizes, hoping her daughter won't cry. After some time, she relaxes when Sherry falls asleep. Looking at her daughter, she feels reassured. After all, she is the head of the family, and no one can take that from her. After some time passes, the little one slowly opens her eyes. Seeing her mom sleeping, she decides to get some warm sheets to cover her mother. And like that, she leaves silently. Later, someone approaches. Our boy, with an unsure look on his face, holding a bowl in his hand. Evelyn, still asleep, continuously mutters her husband's name. Gileath clearly has something on his mind. but proceeds to wake her up. A bit surprised to see him, he notes she hasn't eaten anything all day. He can't have her fainting from hunger, so he offers her food. However, she remains stubborn like your Wi-Fi when you desperately need it. Suddenly, she gets caught by surprise as his hand wanders to her face. He thinks she is ill, asking if that's the reason she doesn't have an appetite. Immediately, she slaps his hand away, demanding to know what he was planning. In response, he knows she has a habit of not eating when she is ill, leading her to ask if this was his way of getting revenge. Honestly, that wasn't the case, because revenge is more meaningful when opponents are on equal footing. In other words, she's not worth considering as an opponent since she is practically so weak. This causes her to push him away. Annoyed, he grabs her by the neck. Irritated, she demands he let go immediately. However, he narrows his eyes and suggests she do it herself if she has the strength. At first, he thought of her arrogance stems from the royal family and believed she was strong, but he was mistaken. Anyway, he lets go, realizing she knocked off the spoon. So now she has to eat without one. She is bewildered as to why this is happening. However, Gilead Black, now serious, insists she doesn't resist. Well, this causes her to imagine a scene, though it's uncertain if it was a memory, but I guess we will find out. Anyway, he feeds her like a child, warning her not to be stubborn. Also, she needs to get used to what she is fed. Promising such a life isn't bad if she adapts, also it suits her expression. Suddenly, he feels something. Sherry is trying to defend her mom, almost tearing up. He takes this as a sign to leave, but before that, he advises her to stay well. And the little one checks on her mom, while Evelyn reflects on his last words. Meanwhile, we are taken back a decade before. Apparently, due to the rain, Evelyn Hunt was ruined. Black avoided contact when her hand came close to his. She noticed this reaction. After a moment of silence, he suggested getting her something. She immediately stopped him by grabbing his hand, timidly asking if he planned to leave her by herself in the woods, but he insisted that she had caught a cold. However, she could see through his words, noting that he was more feverish than her. Adjusting his hair, she suggested he get a haircut and look her in the eye when speaking. However, he still firmly insisted on getting her something. But she immediately declined, stating it's in order. Well, the scene was way too much for him. With that, she comforted him. And no matter what happens, he will always be hers. Evelyn couldn't forget how innocent his eyes were, completely different from now. We shift to the present day. Her servant anxiously reports that her carriage is unusable. She stares silently, complaining inwardly. Gilead Black, seizing the opportunity, suggests riding with him in his carriage. But she ignores him. Instead, she asks how long it will take to be fixed. Hearing it will take 3 hours, she informs Gilead. In other words, she'll only leave in 3 hours. Gilead Black is somewhat in a hurry. So immediately he carries her princess style, leaving her flustered and shocked, resulting in murmurs from the servants. Furious, she slaps him, demanding he let go. This only annoys the soldiers watching their colonel getting slapped continuously. However, Gilead is unfazed, tossing her into the carriage. He reminds her about her current situation, while she couldn't understand how he changed so much. Later, while on the road, the carriage is filled with silence. Black breaks the awkwardness, expressing relief and bringing her food the other day was the right call. However, she wasn't in the mood to chat. His presence only makes her sick. In response, he apologizes, suggesting she use the empty case in order not to mess up the carriage. This causes her to feel embarrassed. So she kicks the case, wondering how he, who couldn't even afford to look her in the eye, was acting up because of a stupid title of hero. Gilead just stares at her ranting non-stop. As usual, he apologizes. Meanwhile, she doesn't understand how he changed so much. He didn't even react to her provocation. Suddenly, she notices a scar on his head. We are taken back to that very day. We also see things from her point of view. She furiously demanded his leave while she was asking nicely. However, he didn't understand why she was doing this, apologizing like he did something to upset her. This only increased her irritation. as people began to gossip. Looking at him still apologizing and pleading, her irritation reached its peak. With that, she delivered a whack with her whip to his head, causing him to bleed. Back to the present, she reaches for the scar, only to be stopped by an irritated Gileath Black, who seriously asks what she was planning. Coming to her senses, she immediately removes her hand. She comes up with an excuse, asking if that's the reason he grabbed her hand violently, concluding that his master didn't lecture him on how to treat a lady. Honestly, she isn't in the position to say that. Not long after, his subordinate reports they've arrived at their destination. With that, Gileath Black steps out, offering his hand and suggesting they continue their discussion of the past some other time. However, in response, she notes that the memory of him makes her sick. Meanwhile, someone watches her from above, never expecting to see her again. Realizing how time flies. It's been 7 years, yet she remains a radiant beauty. The guy grows more interested, thinking the time has come. Just so we know, his name is Victor Alteric, the second in line to be king and the brother to his majesty. Later, Gileath escorted Evelyn to see the king. On the way, Victor Alteric approached them. Both greeted him warmly and formally, and he responded playfully. Then, casually crossing his arm over Evelyn, he remarked that it had been a long journey and must have been taxing, so he invited her for some warm tea. In response, she politely declined, prioritizing her visit to the king first. Victor wasn't annoyed by this. He then reported that his brother's chronic illness had been worsening. Still trying to salvage what's left, he attempted to persuade her. Evelyn sensed a plot from his expression. Regardless, she adjusted her own expression and politely thanked him for his deep concern. She really knows how to play the game. So, Victor immediately switched the topic to Gileath Black, who was just minding his own business. He mentioned Gileath's duties in hunting down treasonous nobles, saying he was so persistent that himself had to wash his hands of him. He then wondered if they were acquainted. Noticing her silence, he quickly seized the opportunity to introduce Gileath Black as the war hero and his hero, who saved him during the war, he even going to great lengths to persuade him to join the army. He knows Black still kept some of his old habits from when he was a mercenary, and hoped he hadn't bothered her on the way. This came as a surprise to Evelyn. She didn't expect our boy to have once been a mercenary. So, she praised his personality. Don't know if it was sarcasm, but she complimented both of them, saying Alteric would have a great future with such promising men. Just then, a servant arrived to inform her it was time to see the king. However, before she left, Victor, still playing the concerned act, assured her that they could talk about anything, and that there was no shame in seeking help. Honestly, it was kind of funny how his hand kept wandering around. He offered that it was best to erase the worries of the past. This caused Evelyn to shoot him a glare and ask if that's the reason he killed her husband. Victor froze, showing a shocked expression. But she immediately shifted her tone, noting that it was just a joke. Poor guy just stood there, realizing he lost the round. Later, inside the king's bedroom, he called for her. Indeed, his illness had gotten so bad that his skin had begun to decay. Nonetheless, as a sign of respect and courtesy, she kissed his hand. Evelyn warmly apologized for not visiting sooner. Elsewhere, the sound of glass shattering could be heard. Victor was literally pissed about what happened earlier, mumbling complaints about Evelyn's annoying attitude. This was a stark contrast to Gileath Black, who was calmly sipping his wine. Meanwhile, Victor kept mumbling that he suspected her confidence came from someone backing her. He reflected, believing that Lowen Winter, Evelyn's husband, was still alive. We then shift to the private me. He spoke about her husband's funeral, noting how young and remarkable he was, fit to be the next leader of the nation. In contrast, Victor was too ambitious. To his brother, Lowen was nothing more than a nuisance he lost first place to at the Imperial Academy. The king was also certain that Evelyn's current predicament was Victor's doing, all to control her. So he advised her not to face Victor directly, because she can't defeat him head-on. But there was still hope for her. And just before he could say more, we shift back to Victor and Gileath Black. Victor wanted him to find Loan at any cost, reminding him who brought him to his current status. When he suggested handing Black a portrait to memorize, Gileath declined, insisting he already knew what Loan looked like. Victor was surprised. He never imagined they had met, and demanded an answer. Gileath Black confirmed he knew him, without further explanation. This made Victor even more curious, noting how interesting he was with every conversation. The truth is, Gileath had seen Loan's portrait countless times. Because back then, he was the one who painted the wedding portrait of his crush and her husband. Man, imagine the pain this guy must have felt. Back to the present, Evelyn concluded her meeting with the king, making a pledge. At the same time, Gileath Black swore to find him. As did Evelyn. It seems both now share the same objective, or so it seems. Later, it was time to depart. As expected, Victor showed up, casually asking why the long face, clearly sensing that the meeting hadn't gone well. Just then, the butler announced the king's order. Evelyn was to be escorted to her estate. But there was a problem. She hadn't brought her carriage. Without hesitation, Victor offered to take her instead. She stared at him silently, clearly calculating something. Then, she laid it all out. Victor Alteric, born of a late king's concubine, had risen through the military ranks. And his title of Grand Duke wasn't enough. His ambition pointed straight to the throne. And while he had the power, claiming it required more than strength, it demanded bloodline and noble support. That's where the House of Winter came in. Evelyn saw through it all. Victor's plan to use her family name to legitimize his claim. Without blinking, she refused. Unwilling to accept her answer, he grabbed her hand. With a dark glint in his eyes, he warned, this would be the last time he showed kindness. Suddenly, a loud voice shattered the tension. It was Joshua, Victor's direct nephew, and his rival for the crown. He demanded to know why his uncle needed such a large presence just to speak with a lady. Victor was stunned. Joshua should have been at the Imperial Academy. But the prince brushed it off. His location wasn't up for debate. Instead, he turned his attention to Evelyn, greeting her warmly. She returned the greeting with grace, honored that the prince recognized her. Joshua, clearly flustered, stumbled over his words. Victor tried to dismiss him, suggesting adults should handle adult matters. But Evelyn disagreed. After all, Joshua was the Academy's top scorer, a source of pride for the family. Still blushing, Joshua admitted he'd been inspired by her late husband. At the mention of her husband, her mood shifted. With a soft tone, she asked for a favor, a carriage to take her home, explaining hers had been attacked by wolves. Victor's lip twitched at the pitiful sight. Joshua hesitated, unsure. But Evelyn knew how to play the game. Her act pushed him to act. Blushing, he quickly ordered his carriage to be prepared. Whispers rippled through the crowd. One of Gileath's men was impressed. Evelyn had flipped the script, beating Victor at his own game and winning the prince's favor in one move. Victor could only watch as she left, tossing in a snide remark about her manipulating his naive nephew. But she fired back with a line that made him stop in his tracks. Still, he walked away vowing she would regret this day. Later, outside, Gileath approached her. He offered to escort her personally, referencing her earlier mention of wolves. That's when she clarified those wolves weren't beasts. They were him and his men. She declined his offer. As she turned to board the carriage, she realized the step was too high. Gileath immediately understood and offered his hand. Surprised, she questioned his intentions. Calmly, he replied, no hidden motive, just basic decency. Though hesitant, she accepted. He wished her good health. She called him out for pretending to care. Maybe it did sound strange, but he was genuinely glad to see her doing well. Slightly embarrassed, she warned him, never show your face again. And with that, she departed. His men couldn't help but notice. He seemed different, lighter, almost happy. To explain it, Gileath shared a memory. Back then, Evelyn once said, the beauty of the hunt is when the prey stops running and turns to face the hunter. That's what this moment was. She had something to lose, her child, her name, her pride. And that made revenge taste even sweeter. For that, he thanked her. For showing what love truly is. Pointless, painful. With a grim expression, he swore, everything will be returned. In the next scene, we shift to a snowy region. Isaac asks Evelyn if she seriously intends to fix the railway. She reflects on this, her gaze lingering on the project before her. We learn about the project. Its purpose is to replace the unreliable sea route with a railway to Brighton Mine, as the region experiences continuous snowfall. This grand endeavor was originally led by her husband to expand the country's trade, and at the time, it was a massive success. However, due to the serious threat posed by Alteric forces, a devastating explosion caused by a neighboring country halted the project entirely. Now, Isaac considers these factors, advising Evelyn to reconsider whether the threat level is still too great or whether the entire design itself needs revision. Despite his concerns, Evelyn stands firm, convinced that the design is flawless. She also recalls her meeting with the king the previous week. In summary, the king needs her to support his son and solidify his stance. She agrees to take responsibility and promises to lead the Brighton project to success, to fulfill the long-cherished dream of both houses. Back in the present, she stresses the urgency of the project. At that moment, Gileath appears. He explains that the region is a civil project and that she needs a permit to proceed with operations. Evelyn scoffs at this nonsense, pointing out that they are the ones trespassing on her property. In response, he feigns ignorance. So, she properly informs him that the project is entrusted to her by the king himself. Spotting a few inconsistencies in the blueprints, she orders Isaac to revise them. With a respectful nod, he quietly exits. Understanding the situation, Gileath signals his subordinates to withdraw. Left alone, he suggests Evelyn proceed with her duties. Meanwhile, she sees his real intention. She understands that this is part of Victor's plot. She and Victor have stood on opposite sides ever since the incident with his nephew. Momentarily distracted, she snaps back to reality, refocusing on the task at hand, finishing her husband's project. She vividly recalls her conversation with her husband, who emphasized that the project was meant to strengthen the nation through international trade rather than keeping it confined to a single port. And now, in this dark time, the project will surely bring light. But as she loses herself in those memories, danger creeps in unnoticed. A loose metal pillar begins to fall from above. Luckily, Gileath senses it in time. He calls for her attention. But she is too stunned to react. Fortunately, he prevents what could have been a catastrophe. However, in the process of saving her, her foot gets soaked in the freezing seawater. Acting fast, Gileath tells her to remove her shoe to prevent frostbite. Finally coming to her senses, she immediately slaps his hand away, warning him never to touch her. Honestly, did she forget that he just saved her life? Even so, Gileath remains calm. He warns her again. Her stubbornness might cost her a foot. Still, she refuses, throwing in a jab, wondering if his ears are just for decoration. Meanwhile, a snowstorm begins to approach. Without hesitation, he grabs her, ordering her to follow him. She can only express her irritation in silence. But Gileath is the least bit concerned. A wooden cottage soon comes into view. Evelyn is instantly bewildered. The building sparks some intimate memories, though it's hard to say for sure. Inside, the silence stretches between them. Gileath simply says they'll wait out the storm. She says nothing, just stares at him. A storm outside, and perhaps one within her as well. Meanwhile, Gileath plans to start a fire. He casually remarks on how the place hasn't changed. But for Evelyn, the place is a void. Everything about it long erased from her memory. His eyes narrow slightly, curious at her reaction. As he starts the fire, he insists that she dry her wet clothes. She doesn't move. Instead, she questions why he seems so indifferent, so unaffected by everything. In response, he reminds her that he is a soldier. Feelings don't serve much purpose where he comes from. Evelyn laughs softly, noting that the boy who once couldn't handle a chisel properly is now a soldier. He wipes his face with her damp hair, a bold move. And with a strange softness, he says it was all thanks to her, that day. She is stunned for a moment, but quickly regains her composure and insists he leave, as usual. However, Gileath informs her that no one knows about her location. If he leaves, she could die. She pouts, believing that would make Victor extremely happy. But Gileath disagrees. On the contrary, his master would be deeply upset. Outside, the storm shows no signs of letting up. He suddenly asks if she remembers the old days. She feels embarrassed. Those days are gone, there's no going back. Curious, she asks what he means. Instead of answering directly, he questions whether she truly loves her husband, Loan. Before she can answer, he adds another, asking if she can handle the project alone. Does Loan really love her? Also, is he the kind of man who would put the woman he loves at risk? Continuously questioning deeply enrages and irritates her. From the way Gileath speaks, it seems Loan is alive. Evelyn also questions his loyalty to the Grand Duke. After all, he is a war hero, so he should be in the palace. Yet here he is, playing the role of a mere bodyguard. Reflecting, she suspects that the issue lies in his humble status as a commoner. The Grand Duke doesn't trust him. Seeing no reaction, she presses further, wondering if he ever worries about being abandoned or if it's simply in his nature to follow orders blindly. He acknowledges that it is his master's habit to mistrust and trample on others. Evelyn laughs at this. Then, circling back to his question, she affirms that she loved Loan. She suddenly grabs Gileath by his tie, her expression serious. She wonders if it was difficult for him to accept. But Gileath doesn't respond. Instead, his gaze shifts toward the bed, reminding her of what happened that day. Now serious, he asks if she truly wore a white dress on her wedding day, if she truly stood before God in purity. Seeing no response, he presses further, asking if she truly lied in front of God and everyone. Having heard enough, she slaps him. Unshaken, he murmurs that with such lies, she may never make it to heaven. She slaps him again. Even harder. Evelyn demands to know what he is trying to achieve by bringing up the past. In response, he catches her off guard by touching her lips. Suddenly, the storm shakes the house. And now, she finds herself on top of him. He teasingly asks what her husband might say if he learned about this. Strangely amused, she tries to end the encounter, insisting that he asked himself after death. Yet Gileath doesn't resist. Instead, he apologizes. He notes that this isn't his time as he reaches into his coat. Pulling out a weapon, he declares that someone like him has no business interfering in the affairs of two noble lovers. Evelyn is stunned. The gun is pointed at her. The scene opens with the completion of Evelyn's wedding portrait. Grief weighs heavily on Gileath, pushing him to the brink of despair. Overcome with sorrow, he is moments away from ending his own life, but Evelyn intervenes just in time. She makes it clear that he does not have her permission to leave without her consent. As he processes her words, she suddenly grabs him by the collar and kisses him, leaving him utterly stunned. That night, they share an intimate moment together. By morning, she beat him. And that was the moment he made his decision. If he wanted revenge, he had to live. Later, during the war, he manages to save Victor, who weakly thanks him. But something feels off. He doesn't recall seeing him among the army ranks. Naturally, he asks for his name. Gileath hesitates for a moment, recalling when Evelyn once gave him a name. Taking a breath, he responds in a firm tone. Victor studies him, noting that his name carries the weight of abandonment. Back in the present, Gileath holds Evelyn at gunpoint. One of his men is startled by the sudden gunshot, scanning the distance anxiously. To their relief, it turns out to be a signal. One soldier panics, suggesting they report to headquarters immediately. Another instructs him to stay calm. As he walks toward the signal, he orders the other one to prepare the carriage. Meanwhile, at the Winter estate, the telephone rings. A female butler answers, informing the caller that the head of the estate is unavailable. However, confusion sets in when she fails to understand what the caller means by a gift. Just then, the door slams open. The caller is revealed to be Victor, who chuckles at the perfect timing. He knows exactly what it means. His gift has arrived. A moment later, Isaac appears, looking as though he barely survived a battle. He reports that masked figures attacked, the project design was stolen, and most concerning of all, Evelyn is now completely alone. As if that weren't enough, they receive a message from the Grand Duke, catching them off guard. Before they can read its contents, the scene shifts back to Evelyn, who stands frozen in shock. Gileath had fired a flare gun. Right on cue, his subordinates arrive to retrieve their colonel. Turning to Evelyn, still stunned, he offers to escort her back to her estate. She sneers at his offer, remarking that he has missed his opportunity and that it is a shame they will never see each other again. Yet, he never intended to kill her. What surprises him most is that she doesn't know about the news. Back at the Winter Estate, moments before the message arrived, during a conversation with the Grand Duke, Victor Alteric makes a remark. Evelyn has no friends and lacks any real social interaction. Regardless, he has purchased the land directly across from her estate. In other words, his gift is an invitation to the welcoming ball, or that's what I think. And as for the owner of that newly acquired estate, the new lord, none other than our protagonist himself. Evelyn is shocked, wondering aloud if the Grand Duke truly granted him the domain. In case it wasn't clear, whether you hear him addressed as Lord Black or Gileath in the future, they are one and the same. Nonetheless, Lord Black extends an invitation to Evelyn to attend his celebratory ball in 2 weeks. And it is worth noting, this is not a request from the Grand Duke. He watches her with that smug look, as if he has figured everything out. Meanwhile, Evelyn is already looking forward to it. Upon arriving at her estate, Evelyn is met by one of her butlers, hurrying toward her with urgent news about the Grand Duke's message. However, upon seeing Lord Black at her side, his striking presence up close, both of the maids instantly blush, their cheeks turning a deep shade of red. Evelyn thanks Lord Black and suggests he leave quickly. He nods in affirmation without saying much and departs. Only after he is gone do the ladies gather around their mistress, curiosity and concern evident in their expressions. However, Evelyn merely asks for her personal butler, Isaac. The man approaches, apologizing profusely. She can tell he has been through a great deal. Without a word, she leaves, ordering them to prepare a bath for her and to fetch a doctor, or rather, someone named Oscar. Later, inside her bath, scented with rose petals, Evelyn leans back, lost in thought. Her mind lingers on her conversation with Lord Black about his upcoming ball. Truthfully, she doesn't understand his intentions. Why would the Grand Duke suddenly purchase the estate across from hers now, rather than doing so long ago? After a moment of reflection, she concludes, it is simply one of his schemes to bring her down. The Grand Duke was truly a force to be reckoned with. She also remembers her late husband, his voice, his predictions. He foresaw the brutal battle for the throne that would follow the king's illness and the immense pressure their family would face. His words felt like a farewell, admitting with regret that he had no friends, something he had come to consider a shame. And now, Evelyn realizes with chilling clarity, she is surrounded only by enemies. Even her servants are visibly anxious. The realization sinks deep. She has no one to turn to. Lost in thought, she feels a small hand reaching out to her. Startled, she turns, only to find Sherry, her daughter, eyes filled with tears. Concerned, Evelyn asks how she got in and why she is crying. But before she can get an answer, the little girl slips, falling straight. Panic surges through Evelyn. Quickly, she pulls her daughter out, scolding her loudly for her carelessness. Midway through her reprimand, she suddenly freezes. She realizes the child was only worried about her. Overcome by emotion, she embraces Sherry tightly, holding her close. She whispers assurances, murmuring everything will be fine. As Evelyn dresses Sherry in fresh clothes, the sound of a loud argument echoes through the halls. Without warning, a young man bursts into the room, claiming to be a doctor. His eyes scan her frantically, asking if she was fine. Evelyn exhales, exasperated. Of all people, it had to be him. Still concerned, he approaches, rummaging through his coat pockets as he prepares to examine her. He pulls out a stethoscope. Frankly, Evelyn begins to question whether he is a real doctor. She promptly slaps some sense into him. She remarks dryly, wondering if all doctors act the same way. Despite his nose bleeding from the slap, Oscar grins, holding up a reassuring thumbs up. He comments on how much she hasn't changed over the past 10 years. In response, she sighs and tells him to drop the awkward formalities. And just like that, the conversation shifts to nostalgia, laughing, reminiscing, strolling through the halls as they discuss the old days. Meanwhile, a masked man watches from the shadows. Observing the scene before him, he realizes things are about to get much more interesting. Later the next day, the conversation unexpectedly veers toward the Brighton project. Oscar is visibly shocked as the topic is brought up. After all, it was the project her husband had worked on. Evelyn, however, quickly assesses his reaction. Yet she knows this is something she can handle. Oscar remains unresponsive, his thoughts fixated elsewhere. His mind drifts back to a scene he witnessed on his way to the estate, an unsettling event. Hesitant but concerned, he brings up the public outrage surrounding her and the Brighton project, cautioning that stirring the issue further might only escalate matters. Evelyn takes a moment to process this, lost in thought. Then, unexpectedly, Oscar panics when she firmly reminds him not to address her so formally. The remark catches him off guard, but before he can react, she softly reminisces about the past, the old days. The words stun him. He remembers those times vividly, back when it was just the three of them. A fleeting moment makes him wonder if they could pick up where they left off. Before he can voice his thoughts, the study door swings open, abruptly interrupting the conversation. Both turn, surprised to find Sherry strolling in. Oscar doesn't waste a second, lifting her in his arms while marveling at how much she has grown. Meanwhile, Evelyn attempts to scold her for barging in without knocking. Sherry pouts, and Oscar, ever the soft-hearted one, supports her, gently reminding Evelyn that it's just them. With a sigh, Evelyn relents, leaving the two alone. Shifting focus to Oscar, he attempts to ask Sherry several questions, but she offers no response, just an innocent, clueless stare. The silence stretches awkwardly, thickening the air between them. The whole situation feels off. Is the girl mute or something? Understanding the tension, Oscar lets her go, unwilling to push further. He only realizes afterward, as the door closes behind her, that she hasn't recovered from that terrible incident. Evelyn remains still, saying nothing. To understand why, the story takes us back in time. An older man took Sherry, not in the way one might expect. The memory is from a time when their public reputation was at its lowest. Evelyn panicked back then, while Lowen remained eerily calm as the old man threatened to end the little girl's life. But her husband wasn't one to tolerate threats. The moment the fool dared to menace his family, he swiftly dealt with him. Even now, the memory sends a chill down Evelyn's spine. A sudden shudder makes her grip tremble, and the cup slips from her grasp, shattering on the floor. Oscar immediately moves to clean up the broken pieces, but his attention lingers on Evelyn's troubled expression. Concerned yet cautious, he asks when she last had proper sleep. Her silence speaks louder than words. He wonders, could something have happened? Just then, Evelyn's mind drifts to him. Holding Oscar's hand, she asks for a favor, but before she can explain, the scene shifts outside. Sherry hums a tune as she steps outdoors, enjoying the fresh air. Her eyes catch sight of a white rabbit. Excitement flares. If she can catch it, maybe she'll impress Mom and Oscar. But in the midst of her chase, a gunshot rings out. The rabbit collapses. Sherry stands frozen, her gaze locked onto the sight of blood pooling onto the ground. A hooded man steps forward. His voice cuts through the stillness as he questions whether she recognizes him. Before the truth can unravel, the scene shifts again. Inside, Oscar urges Evelyn to calm down, pleading for an explanation. Her voice trembles as she admits that she can't trust anyone anymore. They're all trying to destroy her family. Oscar's patience wears thin. He presses further. The answer is already known. It's Lord Gileath and Victor Alteric. Evelyn is still shaken but finally reveals Black was back. Oscar barely has time to react before the head butler arrives with alarming news. It's about her daughter. And from the sheer dread etched on both of their faces, it's clear something terrible has happened. The scene shifts outside. They arrive at the last place Sherry was seen. Evelyn is utterly petrified, frozen in shock. At this moment, anyone would assume the worst, that the little one is gone. The scene shifts to Evelyn's husband's funeral, where whispers and murmurs fill the air. The townspeople speak in hushed tones, their gossip cruel and unrelenting. To them, she is solely responsible for countless deaths. The conclusion is inevitable. They think she is a witch. The weight of their words lingers as the scene transitions to her mansion, where golden sunlight floods the room, casting a warm glow. Just then, Sherry approaches, her small frame hesitant yet curious. She finds her mother lying on the floor, mumbling for her to stay away. The little one watches with wide, innocent eyes, not understanding the sorrow that grips Evelyn. Evelyn begins to recount the tragedies, memories of a childhood shadowed by loss. Her cousins and uncle were gone. And now, her husband. Everyone close to her seems to vanish, one by one. A chilling thought consumes her. She's practically a magnet for death. Determined to protect her daughter, she warns Sherry to keep her distance. But the little one ignores the plea. Instead, she reaches out, offering comfort, attempting to cheer her up. Evelyn is momentarily stunned. The sincerity in those wide, innocent eyes urges her not to give in to despair. For the first time in a long while, she sees hope. The butler steps in, breaking her reverie, reporting that the guards are still searching the area. But Evelyn barely hears him. Her thoughts remain elsewhere. Just as the weight of it all threatens to overwhelm her, her eyes widen. In the distance, two silhouettes, her husband and Sherry. Without thinking, she bolts forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The butler warns her of the danger, but her words are lost as she dashes forward, plunging into the freezing water. Her gaze is locked on Lowen. Desperation takes hold. She silently begs them to wait. But they begin to fade. Panic surges, and she drops to her knees, pleading with Lowen not to take Sherry away. She is all that remains. Her voice trembles, growing louder, the plea turning into something desperate, something raw. Then, she freezes. A figure stands before her. It's Lord Black. His expression is unreadable. Evelyn, on the other hand, stares at the blood staining his weapon. A realization crashes over her mind. Could he have been responsible for Sherry? The misunderstanding lingers until he finally reveals the truth. From beneath his cape, a small, terrified figure emerges. With measured calm, he explains everything. While hunting, he stumbled upon a suspicious man, one who had likely been watching Evelyn from the previous chapter. Without hesitation, he had shot the intruder. Things grew complicated when Sherry became involved. But in the end, his priority had been her safety. Evelyn is left stunned. The little one wastes no time, running straight into her mother's arms. Lord Black might be monstrous in the eyes of many, but he is no demon. The butler arrives moments later, her relief evident at seeing them together again. Meanwhile, Lord Black tenses. His instincts pick up the incoming snowstorm. Frustration flickers in his gaze as he calls off his manhunt. Evelyn remains silent for a long moment before finally speaking. For once, she acknowledges his actions. And she would not forget. Seizing the opportunity, she extends an invitation. He says little in response. Then Oscar arrives, holding warm clothes, immediately chastising Evelyn for running through freezing water. However, his rant halts mid-sentence. Something stops him, the sheer presence of Lord Black. The tension thickens. But Lord Black merely brushes past him, indifferent. At that moment, recognition flashes in Oscar's mind. Memories resurface, old times, when they had all been together. He struggles to piece everything together. Lord Black was Evelyn's servant back then. Yet something remains elusive. He doesn't quite remember him. Inside the Winter Estate, Lord Black accepts Evelyn's invitation. The butler, sensing the tension in the air, swiftly declares her departure. Oscar is the first to speak. He's just learned that Lord Black holds the rank of colonel, and a thought crosses his mind: could they have known each other by chance? Lord Black formally acknowledges the question. And then, recognition strikes. Oscar realizes who he is. A glimmer of relief flickers in his expression. After all, it's been so long. Lord Black responds with a measured nod, thanking him and asking what he's been up to lately. Feeling awkward under the direct question, Oscar scratches his head, helplessly insisting there's no need for formalities. Before the exchange can go any further, Evelyn sharply interrupts. She formally thanks him for saving her daughter. His response is simple. It was no trouble. Protecting his domain was his sole intent. The little one had merely been caught up in it. Evelyn, however, is taken aback when he suddenly shows interest in the identity of the man he had taken down. The realization settles. Enemies lurk in the shadows, too many to count. And the most formidable one is sitting right in front of her. She shifts the conversation, suggesting that he state his reward, even offering to assist in the arrangements for his upcoming ball, though he notes there's no need. Then, steering the subject back, he turns to Oscar. With a tone formal yet unwavering, he suggests that Oscar escort Evelyn as her partner. The sheer absurdity of the notion is evident in their reactions. But Black presses further, going so far as to remark that her late husband would have been proud to see the two together. Irritated, Evelyn sets her cup down with a sharp thud. She reminds him to watch his tone. No matter how much the world may change, social classes remain. And for the first time, Lord Black does not apologize. Years spent as a mercenary have made proper etiquette difficult to grasp. Perhaps that's why he keeps forgetting his place. Without awaiting a reply, he moves toward the window. Gazing out, he wonders aloud whether his reward still stands. He leaves no room for response. Instead, he gestures outside, noting that heading back to his manor is impossible. In other words, he intends to stay in a guest room. Cut to nightfall. Oscar sits in his quarters, staring intently at the book before him. The poor man is utterly lost, unable to piece together the rapid turn of events since his return. So much had changed while he was overseas. But the most impossible thing, that the servant boy he once knew could now stand before them as Lord Black. Then again, change is inevitable. A realization strikes him. Something crucial. Elsewhere, Black and Evelyn stand alone. Oscar's eyes widen in shock. But before that revelation unfolds, cut to Evelyn. Under the weather and feeling feverish, she contemplates calling a servant. But for some unknown reason, she hesitates. Abandoning the thought, she chooses instead to seek Oscar out personally. Walking down the dim hallway, she's suddenly caught off guard. Someone is standing there. Annoyed, she assumes it's Oscar, and wonders why he isn't saying anything. Only, she's stunned the next moment. Because without looking, she already knows. It's him. Lord Black stands before her, his gaze locked onto the wedding portrait that once shattered his heart. Elsewhere, dark ink spills onto paper. Oscar appears as though he just understands the reason to why 2 + 2 = 4. He rubs his temples. Why had he forgotten something so crucial? The memory returns vividly. The moment Lord Black pressed a soft kiss to Evelyn's forehead while she lay asleep. And Oscar had witnessed everything, like a silent spectator to a moment never meant to be seen. The thought unsettles him. A servant, entangled with his lady. Back to the present. Evelyn, still processing what she sees before her, finally speaks. Her voice carries a note of disbelief. She asks Lord Black what he is doing. Lord Black watches her in silence for a moment before making an offhand remark about the painting. His words leave Evelyn momentarily stunned. Gathering herself, she reminds him that it's rude for a guest to be wandering the manor so late at night. If he has nothing better to do than stare at paintings, he might as well leave. Even as she speaks, her thoughts swirl. Despite feeling lightheaded, she plans to stay in the study, not knowing what he might do if left alone. Worse, calling a servant at this hour would only fuel rumors. Anyone would assume something intimate was going on. Her mind snaps back to the present when Black finally notices her feverish condition. As usual, she dismisses him, telling him to mind his own business. But in response, he wonders if Oscar is just incompetent. Or maybe, just maybe Oscar and Evelyn are secretly involved, and he had simply interrupted them. Immediately, Evelyn rises to her feet, frustration evident. It seems Lord Black is moments away from receiving a well-deserved slap. Thankfully, she falters. The throbbing pain forces her to sit back down. She warns him not to speak nonsense. Yet from her reaction alone, Black can tell she's anxious. As always, she denies it. Since she refuses to call for a servant, he isn't about to let her faint. Interesting. It seems history is about to repeat itself. Except it doesn't. Even the translator got annoyed, wondering what Black is waiting for and how he plans to take his revenge. Regardless, his attention shifts to the liquor. Evelyn chimes in, casually noting it's worth practically the price of 2 carriages. Black, curious, takes a sip. Evelyn is caught off guard when he suggests they drink together. Her gaze lingers on him intently. And for a brief moment, she's taken aback by his appearance. She shakes her head. Snapping out of it, she blames her fever for clouding her thoughts. Determined to sober up, she reaches for her drink. Accidentally, she grabs the wrong glass. Black watches her indifferently. A moment later, she tastes the liquor and immediately complains it's far too strong. Without hesitation, he decides to help. Is he doing all this to get her to lower her guard? I wonder. Still, he remains detached, instructing her to drink slowly. But from Evelyn's perspective, all she sees is Lord Black, back when he was innocent. Moved by the memory, she reaches out, whispering his name affectionately. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those Chinese manhwa where the protagonist loses control and rocks the entire mansion. Instead, he instantly realizes she isn't fully aware of what she's doing. And just like that, she faints in his arms. Speechless, he understands things are becoming far more complicated than expected. Nonetheless, he carries her to the fireplace to warm up. Just as he prepares to leave, he spots a servant approaching. To avoid complications, he plans to wait a little longer before slipping out. But then, Evelyn stirs. She reaches out once more. Lord Black is genuinely caught off guard by the sudden gesture. Her flushed cheeks. The soft, barely audible word, noting that she was cold. For a second, he finds himself speechless. Regardless, Bro quickly avoids trouble. Or did he avoid trouble? The scene abruptly shifts to the forest, where Evelyn successfully snipes a fox. Satisfied with her marksmanship, she considers using the fur to craft a scarf herself. But after a moment's thought, she realizes it would suit him even better. Excitement bubbles in her chest at the achievement, only for it to vanish in an instant. A cold dread grips her. Her body stiffens. And then, she collapses to the ground, petrified with fear. The sight before her is something out of a nightmare. Her uncle and cousins. Their voices rise in accusatory echoes, condemning her for leading them to their end. Desperate, she scrambles to flee, denying their claims, trying to escape the weight of their words. Then right on cue Loan appears. Evelyn freezes, shocked to see him. But he swiftly reassures her, urging her not to be afraid. Without hesitation, he lifts her, carrying her in a princess style. A quiet promise leaves his lips, he will protect her. Yet even in his arms, Evelyn's gaze catches something in the distance. It's our boy. She reaches out, calling for him. But he ignores her. Desperation builds in her chest. She screams his name, only to jolt awake, breathless and stunned. It was all a dream. Even more shocking, Lord Black, seated casually, waiting. He had clearly understood she was having a nightmare. Evelyn locks eyes with him, embarrassment washing over her. Uncertain, she wonders if she had uttered anything strange in her sleep. Black, ever composed, gently assures her there's no need to worry. Then, in a steady tone, he suggests she rest more. Her fever has gone down, which is good. That's when she suddenly remembers. The servants are outside. He acknowledges this fact as well, and reveals that he has already planned how to slip away unnoticed. All she needs to do is rest. Evelyn finds herself speechless at his care. She cannot fully grasp his intentions. Is it simply because she's ill? Or is he like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Her thoughts spiral. But she can't afford to dwell on them, not now. Her head feels heavy. Deciding to retire for the day, she lets exhaustion take over, even if it means sleeping next to her enemy. The next morning arrives swiftly. Lord Black wastes no time. He departs for his manor at first light. Meanwhile, the sleeping beauty finally awakens, stirred by the early morning sun. Rising from couch, she moves toward the window. Her gaze locks onto the figure in the distance, watching intently as Black makes his way back to his mansion. And then, cut to him. His fists tighten. Memories of the previous day linger, an irritating reminder. Especially that one moment, when Evelyn dropped her guard entirely. That vixen. She knew exactly what she was doing. And he had been caught off guard. He exhales sharply. Looking as handsome as ever, yet visibly annoyed at the same time. The day of Lord Black's grand ball arrives. Thanks to Victor Alteric's influence, only the most prestigious nobles and elites of the nation attend. Among them, some less than reputable figures. One particularly blonde noble catches murmurs of disdain. Rumor has it that he is a reckless gambler, desperately seeking financial support to escape his mounting debts. The conversations within the ballroom are lively, varied, shifting from politics to scandal. But soon, all attention turns toward the newly established aristocrat, Lord Black, standing amidst the crowd, effortlessly commanding their gaze. Just then, Victor Alteric approaches, a wide grin stretching across his face. He compliments Black's choice of attire, teasing that he's gone all out tonight. Then, with a knowing smirk, he suggests that Black begin introducing himself properly to the elite. After all, he's the hot topic among noble ladies. Now, with amusement laced in his voice, he asks how Black feels about effortlessly charming them all, with nothing more than his presence. To this, Black remains silent, lost in thought, his expression unreadable. Before the exchange continues, one of Victor's close friends arrives, interrupting their conversation. Understanding the situation, Black steps back, giving them space. Yet his mind lingers elsewhere. Meanwhile, at the winter estate, Evelyn browses through various dresses in preparation for the ball. But no matter how luxurious, none seem to satisfy her. One of her attendants watches in stunned silence. The dresses were designed by Alteric's top stylists, with select pieces imported from abroad. Yet Evelyn remains unimpressed. Instead, she instructs her butler to retrieve a dress from her wardrobe. Confused, the attendant hesitates. Evelyn clarifies, it is the only dress inside. Back at Lord Black's estate, a special guest arrives. Victor, ever playful, insists that Black personally welcome the guest. After all, it is a gift from him, the most noble lady in all of Alteric. Keeping a composed exterior, Black inwardly braces himself. Stepping out of the carriage is the renowned beauty, Sonia Perez, the lotus of the nation. Her greeting is graceful, measured. Truly, Victor spared no effort on Black's behalf. Having a boss like Victor, many would consider it a dream come true. Victor responds warmly, noting that Sonia is like a sister to him. Then, turning to Black, he instructs him to escort her inside. With intrigue gleaming in his eyes, he probes further, asking Black what he thinks of the White Lotus. Black merely stares. Approaching her, Sonia is stunned, her cheeks flushing with color. Then, in a polished tone, he formally introduces himself, Gileath Black, Colonel of the Army, a good friend to Victor. A bit embarrassed, she replies she has heard much about him. Black, ever composed, feels humbled, though he suspects the stories she's heard might be far from reality. Sonia, however, is caught off guard when he gently offers to show her inside. Perhaps even to his room. It isn't explicitly stated, but it might happen. Her face turns bright red. She is moments away from accepting when the last guest arrives, interrupting them completely. A flicker of irritation crosses Black's face. Victor, ever the instigator, mockingly asks if she was heading to the convent. And yes, the guest is none other than the villainess, making an entrance as grand as ever, draped in a distinctively dark outfit. A striking choice, and one that does not go unnoticed. Among the nobles, whispers spark. The dress resembles the one Evelyn wore at her husband's funeral. Ignoring the murmurs, Evelyn strides directly to Victor, demanding an explanation for her poor treatment. In response, he offers an apology partially. He has no desire to create unnecessary tension among the other nobles. Apparently, this is exactly what Evelyn had wanted to hear. Satisfied, she now turns her attention to Black. With sharp precision, she suggests that he personally escort her inside. Victor, rendered momentarily speechless, struggles to process the abrupt shift in events. Meanwhile, Sonia watches, confused. On the other hand, Black carefully considers the situation. Ignoring Evelyn would be a mistake. It would undoubtedly spark rumors, ones that could prove inconvenient for his master. And who knows what consequences may follow. Understanding his position, he has no choice but to accept. He steps forward, leaving the White Lotus standing in place. At that moment, realization dawns in her eyes. She finally understands. Evelyn was the villainess of the Winter Estate. Escorting Evelyn into the ballroom immediately stirs commotion among the guests. Whispers rise like an unsettling tide, laced with insults and harsh remarks. She can hear them, but there's nothing she can do. So, she shifts her attention to Black instead, wondering how it feels to be the center of attention. He, on the other hand, remains composed, offering little in response. Before proceeding, the House of Perez is introduced. Its history is brief, rising to prominence only when a daughter of the family bore a son for the former king. That son was Victor. His mother's status as a royal concubine secured the family's influence. However, everything unraveled the moment she died in an accident, plunging the Perez family into instability. Cut to a moment before the ball. Victor and Sonia engage in a serious conversation. In summary, Victor seeks every asset he can gather. Wealth, troops, commodities, all essential in securing his place on the throne. And most importantly, someone who can act as a shield to prevent everything from crumbling. That someone is our boy. Snapping Sonia from her thoughts, he requests a dance. With a careful tone, he asks whether she feels uncomfortable. Realizing she had momentarily slipped into distraction, she quickly apologizes. Still, she's excited. He's chosen her as his first dance partner. As the two begin, nobles murmur among themselves, noting how well they complement each other. Speculation soon follows. Many conclude that Victor intends to make Lord Black a son-in-law to the Perez family. Meanwhile, Sonia watches Black carefully. If not for his humble background, he would be an undeniably fascinating figure. Let's cut to Evelyn. Bored out of her wits, she absently sips her drink. Yet, she cannot stop watching the two as they move across the dance floor. Her mind wanders. She recalls the time when she had caught him off guard with an unexpected request, asking him to be her dance partner. He had initially refused, but she insisted. With the ball approaching, she didn't want him making her look bad. Now, she had teased him into agreement. It had amused her how easily flustered he had become. Back to the present. She mentally traces every movement, silently reciting their steps as she watches them. Just as she finds herself lost in thought, someone calls her name. She turns, momentarily stunned. Victor approaches, moving with deliberate calm. He has been observing her for quite some time. She has no dance partner. Sensing his intention, she immediately rejects the idea, preferring instead to sit and watch the others. The nobles take note of this exchange. Undeterred, Victor presses on. His offer, he claims, is meant as a gesture of consolation. Evelyn replies sharply, his brother, the king, has already offered enough consolation. Victor exhales, visibly disappointed. He had hoped they would have reached a better understanding by now. Still, he insists, the song is about to change, it's the perfect opportunity. At the same time, Sonia missteps. A misplaced foot lands right on Black's. Instant panic. She apologizes profusely, but his attention is elsewhere. Eventually, Evelyn is left with little choice. She accepts the dance. Though irritation flickers in her expression, she steps onto the floor. Sonia notices. Quickly turning to our boy, she sees the confusion settle in his eyes. He watches them, trying to understand what's happening. Shifting to Evelyn, she is caught off guard by Victor's concern. He inquires about her recent business activities, prompting her to thank him for the interest. However, Victor Alteric doesn't seem to follow. Sensing an opportunity, Evelyn challenges him on the so-called gift he sent was Isaac, her worker responsible for handling the Brighton Bridge project. Victor denies any involvement, feigning ignorance. Her expression hardens. She presses further, asking if he truly had no hand in Isaac's situation and the missing blueprint. His response is unexpected. A teasing smirk crosses his lips as he proposes an alternative. If she satisfies him, perhaps he'd understand. His words leaves her momentarily stunned. Meanwhile, shifting back to Black and Sonia, she notes that he is an exceptional dancer. Yet, even as they move, his mind seems elsewhere. Black, sensing her growing unease, quickly finds an excuse, offhandedly mentioning that the music is a bit loud. Just as he leans in slightly to hear her better, they accidentally bump into Victor and Evelyn. Without hesitation, he offers an apology. At the same time, he subtly signals to Sonia. She understands the assignment immediately. With a sudden misstep, she loses her footing, crashing straight into Black. Without delay, she apologizes, claiming she has sprained her foot. Seizing the opportunity, she suggests that they step away to somewhere private, a quiet place where she can rest. Black hesitates, but ultimately resigns himself to helping. Victor observes the exchange with mild amusement, thinking to himself, they make quite the perfect pair. Turning his attention back to Evelyn, he can tell she isn't doing well. Yet she deflects, telling him to worry about Sonia instead. His smirk deepens, amused at her cluelessness. Then, lowering his voice, he slows their dance, casually suggesting she stop playing hard to get. The remark leaves her stunned. Before he can say anything more, Evelyn abruptly separates from him. With lowered head, she respectfully excuses herself, using the conclusion of the song as a convenient reason to leave. Victor, however, doesn't intend to let her off so easily. But it's too late. She's already slipping away. Later, Evelyn sits alone on the balcony. Her mind still lingers on Victor, frustrated that she hadn't gotten him to admit his involvement with the blueprint. Even worse, she had tripped, offering him the perfect opportunity to humiliate her. Annoyance boils beneath the surface. Just as she begins muttering complaints about her leg hurting, someone calls for her attention. She stiffens. The blonde noble from before approaches. She hadn't expected anyone to find her here. Meanwhile, shifting back to Black, he tends to Sonia in one of the private rooms. Despite her claims, he can immediately tell her foot is perfectly fine. But the lady herself is lost in a world of fantasy. Her thoughts spiral as she compares him to other men, noting just how strikingly handsome he is. Her face flushes. She wonders how she might make him fall for her, only for her thoughts to shatter the moment Black suggests calling for a doctor. Panic strikes. She hastily tries to stop him, moving too quickly, only to trip in the process. Calm as a mock but sharp as an eagle, Black takes note of the situation. She lands against him, her arms wrapping around him. Shifting back to Evelyn and the blonde noble, he eyes her curiously, almost as if wondering if she'd been kicked out of the party. Meanwhile, Evelyn struggles to place him, his face vaguely familiar, but his name escaping her. The noble looks at her with pleading desperation. He needs her help. Switching to our boy, he questions Sonia, who pleads with him to wait. She claims to be nervous, yet, strangely, she feels very comfortable when she is with him. Despite this bombshell of a confession, our boy remains silent, which stuns her. Suddenly, a sound comes from the door. Sonia wonders whom it might be. Meanwhile, we shift back to Evelyn. She finally recognizes the man as Baron Theodore, who responds with a warm gesture. Looking at the grand ball and the nobles inside, Baron Theodore finds it all pathetic. Their conversation begins in a way that raises suspicion. Evelyn advises him to watch his words, but he persists, noting that both of them are the same. He asks if she doesn't feel annoyed. They knew she wasn't physically well, yet they dragged her to the ball, forced her to dance, and humiliated her. As he continues to rant, Evelyn simply stares at him coldly, as if she has figured everything out. Suddenly, she notices he is drunk and suggests he retire to his mansion. But Theodore refuses, still rambling about how the nobles are nothing but ingrates. In response, she decides to leave. Panicked, he stops her, insisting that they continue the conversation. Out of nowhere, he proposes a business cooperation, one that could lead to massive profit with little capital. Immediately, he is silenced by a slap. Even though Evelyn has enemies, that doesn't mean she is unaware of his financial ruin after losing his fortune to gambling. Annoyed, he suddenly grabs her by the hand. Evelyn instructs him to let go, but he insists that they are the same. After all, her business isn't going smoothly either. Reflecting, he assumes she came to the party seeking a rich and dependable man. Just as his hand begins to wander. At the same time, her foot finds its way to his groin. With that, she leaves, letting the fool grunt in pain. Suddenly, she is yanked by the hair and thrown to the ground. Cursing, he mocks her, noting that her situation isn't any better than his, so she shouldn't act high and mighty. Meanwhile, shifting to black, he discovers two servants leaning in. Embarrassed, the fool runs off without saying a word. He remains speechless and puzzled. Turning to Sonia, he suggests she rest and plans to get something for her to drink. Shifting back to the ball, Black cannot spot his master. Seeing the light from the balcony, he decides to head there. Meanwhile, the foolish Baron is already on top of Evelyn. She struggles to get free but finds it difficult. Now, the fool, excited, decides to clap her, realizing no one will intervene. Just then, the door slowly creaks open. Both of them freeze instantly. Meanwhile, our boy stares back, his expression unreadable. However, before we proceed, let's shift to Sonia, waiting anxiously in the room. Normally, when a man shares wine with a woman alone, it could lead to something. However, our boy is taking too long, making her grow even more anxious. She is distracted by the fireworks display outside. Just as she begins to admire the spectacle, she is stunned, her eyes almost tearing up at what she sees.